Chapter 19, Cantankerberg, Part 2. Isobel closed her eyes and pressed her fingertips together, conjuring the words. The birds hushed and the light seemed to dim. She separated her fingers, opened her eyes, and began. We were born in Freeland. We knew nothing else. When I was 15 and Jason was 17, we grew restless and began to plot our escape. Not that escape was forbidden, it simply was not done. That was when Mars and Mab arrived, and the evening councils began. Mab told tales of a great devastation and the changes to come. She told us of the thread of destiny that each person must follow as the power of love was pushed gradually outward against the forces of chaos and cruelty. Her tales did not dissuade us. We wanted to experience this chaos and cruelty for ourselves. We wanted to learn its ways so we could more effectively combat it. One spring morning, we left Freeland and never returned. What we did not know was that on that same morning, Mars left Freeland as well, commissioned by Mab to follow us, watch over us, protect us from harm. Dangers beset us at once from bandits, beasts, and bands of renegade black coats. Mars was able to remain incognito for a while, ambushing marauders and making deals with other protectors in dark, smoky taverns. But in a lonely field outside of Kidney Stone, he had to reveal himself, or I would have been captured into the slave trade, and the knife the black coat held at Jason's throat would have entered the flesh. There was a pause in the narrative. The pause itself seemed as deliberate as the story, like this whole telling was something they had done countless times before, a kind of mummer's tale. Jason laid his head on Isobel's lap. "I love you, sweetheart," he said, his voice like a child's. But Mars stirred restlessly. "Get to the good stuff, Isobel." Isobel closed her eyes, consulted her eyelids, and continued. We traveled together then for many seasons, and Mars and Jason learned something about each other. As repulsed as they both were by the ugliness and depravity of the world, they had, each in his own way, developed a fascination for it. Its garish colors, its cacophonous rhythms, the relentless pace in which it hastened the blood flowing through the body, and also the way that small moments of tenderness, those that would have gone unnoticed in Freeland, stood out in bold contrast with the terror and bitterness of the world of chaos and cruelty. Jason sat up with one hand on Isobel's knee. "Isobel didn't share our fascination," he said. "I get to tell this part. She said it was a sign we had learned what we came to learn. We had overstayed our welcome, and it was time to return. But we couldn't return." Isobel picked up the thread. A great fire had broken out on the plains of Abelman, and the entire city of Kidney Stone had been destroyed and bands of flesh-eating hominids roused from their caves, were migrating east. But we couldn't. A great fire had broken out on the plains of Abelman. The entire city of Kidneystone had been destroyed, and bands of flesh-eating hominids, roused from their caves, were migrating east. We sought the relative safety of the crowded underbelly of Cantankerberg, and Mars left us to build his business of pots and pans and to glean the mind-bending herbs that grow wild on the southern foothills just across the border. We hunted wild cats in the alley and sought their meat and sold their meat in the night market until the blackcoats destroyed our stand. Jason spoke. I had to kill one of them, or I would have lost Isobel. He was deeply grieved, Isobel continued. We fled to the catacombs within the walls of the city, and eventually we discovered the flight of stairs and this empty room on the 7th floor of Solomon's Tower. It has a generator that burns the black stone, and there was a goodly supply of the ore in the bin. With what money we had, we hired the child, Bambi, to bring us the things we would need to survive here. We made a pact in blood that if the changes did not come in our lifetime, we would die in this place. The world outside was no longer an attraction. Isobel left another pause, then even longer than the first, and in it Mars stood, stretched, coughed, and sat back down. Jason sat straight-spined, took a long draft of air, and expelled it slowly. Isobel allowed the silence to gather. One day, Bambi arrived with her entire body wrapped in a string of frosted glass tubes. The inscription read, "Magic Glow." We plugged him into the generator, and suddenly it was a warm summer afternoon. A moon later, and things began to grow from the cracks in the walls, little vines that ran down and curled across the floor, and after a while, little pink and purple blossoms. Our spirits were lifted, said Jason. We developed a plan, continued Isobel. Bambi enlisted some of her friends. Daily, they brought up buckets full of fertile soil from a small wooded area near the river. It wasn't long before foliage began to sprout from the floor. First the mushrooms, then the scrub brush, and finally the sweet little arms of tender young trees. Bambi brought paints and brushes. I painted a blue sky and hazy distant mountains. Birds that had been lost for generations in the hollow caverns of the building found the young trees and made them their home. One day, Mars Daniel appeared. He wouldn't say how he found us, but he brought us money and food and smoking herbs from the southern foothills. Since then, he has come regularly whenever he passes this way. He is our connection to the world outside. We've created a little bit of free land here, Jason said. We made a pact and sealed it in blood. If the changes don't come in our lifetime, we will die here. But since we made that pact, all this has happened. It feels like Bezel has smiled on our actions and blessed us. Jason had finished the story that Isobel had started. He turned to Mars. So, tell me, my friend, what about this illumination you brought us? In the night, Johnny got up to pee. but he didn't know where to do it. Had this been a regular forest outdoors, he would have just peed on the first tree he found. But that didn't seem quite right here. Mars was slumped out on a pile of dry leaves, and Jason and Isobel were hidden somewhere in the shadows. The magic glow lights were dimmed to simulate the glow of the moon. Johnny felt his way through the branches until he came to a wall. He followed the wall until he reached a door. It had no handle. He pushed it gently and it swung open. The hot, fetid reek of the street rushed into his nostrils. There was a dark, narrow hall, littered with unidentifiable scraps, some hard and sharp, others soft and squishy. At the end of the hall, a pale, undulating glow and the muffled clamor of the city. He found himself on a tiny iron balcony, no wider than his own stance, looking down on the tremulous streets of Cantankerberg, still teeming with life at this late hour. The lanterns glowing, the patterns of moving bodies, the barking of dogs. On the opposite tower, he saw lights glowing in some of the lower windows, but from the 8th floor up, all was dark. The higher panes shattered, and at the top, the building disintegrated into a mass of crumbled walls and splintered metal shards, like flame frozen in mid-flicker. Above him, from the higher floors of Solomon's Tower, he heard a cry. It could have been a wolf, or it could have been a woman. A volley of other voices followed, wails, yips, and barks from all directions, above and below. Then, another sound, the repeated report of gunfire. More than one gun. Then more voices, rhythmic, pulsating, and a woman scream. From many floors above, glass shattered. Johnny saw the fragments raining down, then, soundlessly, a naked body twisting slowly in obedient descent. From the streets grew a disturbance of voices, first a minor chord, then a scattering of phrases rising to a chorus of screams, but it quickly subsided, washed over by a wave of other sounds, the whine of engines, a heated argument in another alley, the throb of drums. Johnny felt his body go limp. If it hadn't been for the railing, he too would have tumbled to the streets below. Then he remembered. I came out here to pee. With hands trembling, he dropped his pants and released his bladder into the abyss.